Welcome back into Pigskin Perspectives. We did the NFC recap of their season, giving each team in the NFC a grade. It is now time for the AFC, the conference of the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. It was a much more interesting year for the AFC. They had a lot of interesting teams, to say the least, whether it be teams at the very top competing for the Super Bowl or competing in the playoffs, and the very bottom, which was just awful. So there are a lot of varying grades here. I feel like there's going to be a lot of disagreement with these. So these are just my personal grades, as always. So let's just sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of Pigskin Perspectives as we recap the AFC season by giving out AFC team grades. So we are going to start with the AFC East. The Buffalo Bills win the division. They end up losing in the playoffs once again, this time at home to Kansas City instead of on the road. I'm still giving them an A- for the season. Yes, losing to Kansas City again in the playoffs, it hurts. But given this team was at 6-6 at one point, they fire Ken Dorsey, and then they just rattle off I believe it was a 6-game winning streak, something like that at the end of the season, and go into Miami, the last game of the regular season, literally the last one, Sunday Night Football, and you pull out the victory to win the division. That was a very, very good turnaround by Sean McDermott and his men of Buffalo Bills. So even though the loss in the playoffs did hurt their grade, the whole second half turnaround really helped them, which earned them the A- here. Obviously, the goal in this offseason, find out a way to beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, because you can beat them in the regular season however many times you want, but until you beat them in the playoffs, none of that matters. And that goes for anybody in the AFC. Until somebody beats them in the playoffs, none of it matters. So for the Bills especially, they have to strengthen their defense somehow, find a way to get stops on Patrick Mahomes. And you got to find good playmakers for that. And that should be the Bills' target this offseason, but they'll probably go in 3 different directions and still will somehow find a way to lose to the Chiefs in the playoffs next year. Moving on to the Miami Dolphins. They made the playoffs. They played Kansas City in the wild card round. It was negative 30-degree wind chill, and the Dolphins lost that game. They're in a B- this season. They're the complete opposite of the Buffalo Bills. Their first half of the season was absolutely outstanding. They really didn't play anybody good, though. That's a big factor here. They didn't really play anybody good. And when they started playing those good teams, that's when the losses kept stacking up. And they were found out to be frauds again, which it really felt like this was the year that Miami had to shed that fraud tag. I mean, they went a full calendar year without beating a team above 500. It went even past that. It was on Christmas Eve, I believe it was, when they beat the Dallas Cowboys, and that was their first win in over a year against a team above 500. And it's just not good enough when you have the talent that you have. You should be winning those games. You should have won the division. You didn't. You blew that in the end. And then you just didn't show up in Kansas City, and that was your season. So B-. Nothing much you can do about it. You got to find a way to get better this offseason. I don't know how. You have great players. It's just they don't show up in big games. So what kind of move do you do there? I have no idea. You got to find a way for big-time players to step up in big games. And that's all I really got to say about that. The New York Jets, a lost cause. The Aaron Rodgers Jets era 2023 season. Lasted 3 total plays. And then it was over. Then it was Zach Wilson. Then it was Trevor Siemian. I don't even remember if he was on the Jets this year. I know Zach Wilson then got benched. And then Zach Wilson was back. And then Zach Wilson got benched. Their defense is still very good. Their offense is just still so very, very bad. And it's mostly because of the quarterback position. The Jets earn a D+. I mean, this was just a train wreck of a season, and it all started 3 plays into the season. Absolute train wreck. But for the Jets, their saving grace was they weren't the only train wreck in this division. The other one being the New England Patriots, and they earned the F. This is not how you wanted the Bill Belichick era to end, but it kind of felt like that was the only way that this was going to happen. And the Patriots, they're also battling quarterback problems. Mac Jones 100% doesn't look like the guy. Obviously, my guess is that they're going to go quarterback in this draft, which I don't think is a great idea, but Gerard Mayo has a lot of rebuilding to do. I mean, this offense was anemic. They were awful. The defense, yes, they had some redeeming qualities on the defense, but offensively, man, this team was bad. And they just couldn't score, period. So there's a lot that needs to be figured out in New England this offseason. I think bringing in a new coaching staff helps with that. We're going to see what happens there, but the New England Patriots are not for this season, and you don't want to see Bill Belichick going out like that, as he didn't get another job. So my guess is it might be over for him. I don't know. I'm sure another big job will come knocking next year, the team that's in a win now mode, but it was not a great year for the New England Patriots. Moving on to the AFC North, the Baltimore Ravens, they were the number 1 seed. They steamrolled the Houston Texans in the divisional round of the playoff, their first game of the playoffs. And then they lose the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC title game, where it looks like John Harbaugh overcoached the game, overthought the game, and that cost them the game. The Ravens earn a B, which I'm being very harsh there. I will be honest, I'm being very harsh. They probably could be in a B+, A- situation. But the way they lost the game to Kansas City, just the playbook was right there. You just keep running it down the Chiefs' throat, because the Chiefs' run defense wasn't that great this year. Yet they just decided to give Lamar Jackson all the power and say, Lamar, go out there and make the plays. And at some points he just couldn't. Zay Flowers cost them a game a few times with a few bad penalties. Now, it is very overreactionary to give a grade on a team based on one singular game in the playoffs, but it felt like this year had to be the year for Harbaugh, or else kind of felt like, hey, we've been in this situation multiple times and we've kind of gotten the same result. Like, what's going on here? It kind of felt like that, and I really don't know what they do from here. They lose Mike McDonald, who was the defensive coordinator of this outstanding defense this year. And I don't know where the Ravens go from here, because it was a complete overthinking of this game, and that's why they lost. Just a tough end for the Ravens season. The Cleveland Browns, they didn't win the division. They made the playoffs, though. They're an A-. Now, again, might be some hometown bias in here, if I'm honest. But the amount of adversity this team faced injury-wise this year, losing Nick Chubb week 2, was it Jet or... I don't remember which offensive lineman we lost week 1. You deal with a lot of injuries in the secondary. You deal with an injury to Deshaun Watson, who, might have been actually a saving grace, his injury. But then you deal with an injury to DTR, PJ Walker just not being good, ending up with Joe Flacco as your quarterback. Myles Garrett, he never was really out. He just kind of felt like he was dealing with injuries a lot. The Browns just faced so much adversity this year. It was, just handed to them the excuses of the injuries. That's why we finished 5-13. They didn't do that. They went out with Joe Flacco, nonetheless, off the couch, make the playoffs. Now, the playoff game, again, was not great at all. Joe Flacco reverting to Joe Flacco of last year instead of Joe Flacco of 2012. It cost them, and, it was a sour end to what was a very good season. But it's just with all the adversity that they faced, Kevin Stefanski won Coach of the Year for a reason. And I think that's why the Browns deserve the A-, just with the amount of injuries and just the comeback from that. Just I think it spoke a lot about where this Browns team hopefully is headed. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they earn a C. They have an okay team. It's just they don't have a quarterback. Kenny Pickett is not good. I think anybody saw that coming. That quarterback class looks worse and worse each year. Nobody really great came out of that class. You have Brock Purdy, but nothing outstanding came out of that draft class. And, here we are now. The Steelers, I think they're going to be in the quarterback market this offseason because, they were going between Rudolph and Pickett. Neither of them are good, so you got to find something there. And that should be the big focus for the Steelers this offseason because they are wasting TJ Watt's career, which, again, it's okay with me, but I know the people of Pittsburgh ask for more, and you got to have a good team behind him. I think you got a young, good team in the Steelers. They just need a quarterback to maybe take that next step. I know there were a lot of calls from Mike Tomlin maybe to move on. I don't think that would have been the right decision. I think sticking with him is the right decision. And they move on to next season and hopefully have a better quarterback. We'll see, but hopefully we get better there. The Cincinnati Bengals, they earn a C-. This kind of just fell flat after Joe Burrow's injury. Now, Jake Browning did come in, did do decently, probably earned himself a nice contract this offseason. Just, they didn't look great. I know they still finished above 500. This whole division finished above 500, so I think that's a statement to how good this division is. But the Bengals, they earn a C- just because after Joe Burrow's injury, the team was not the same. Moving on to the AFC South, a division that did bring out a shocker this year, and that was the Houston Texans. They earn an A. I don't think anybody expected year one DeMeco Ryans, CJ Stroud to be this good. Obviously, they win the division. They win their wild card game against the Cleveland Browns. Of course, that game was at home. And then they go out on the road. They had a lead against the Ravens. They lose that game. But no, I don't think anybody expected the rebuild to be this quick. And I'm not saying that the rebuild is done. I'm just saying it was a 1 year ahead of schedule type year, it seemed. And if this Texans team gets better, this team's going to get scary. And, Texans might be good the next few years. CJ Stroud looks like a very, very good pick of a quarterback. DeMeco Ryans looks like he was the right hire for this job. And I'm excited to see where this team goes because I think that they can be really good in the upcoming few years. The Indianapolis Colts, they earn a B+. Somewhat like the Cleveland Browns, dealt with a lot of injury adversity this year, including their number 4 overall pick, Anthony Richardson. I mean, they lost him very early on in the season. I think it was week 1 or week 2. Gardner Minshew comes in, almost leads them to the playoffs. I mean, they were playing week 18 for a shot of the division, and obviously they lose that game on a bad play call, which can be argued. It was a bad play call, but they paid Jonathan Taylor right at the beginning of the season, so that's not a worry this offseason. The biggest worry this offseason, I think, is getting Anthony Richardson back to 100% because you don't really know what you have in him right now. You didn't get to see enough playing time from him to know what you have from Anthony Richardson. The Jacksonville Jaguars, they earn a C. I don't think this was the season anybody expected them to have. I think a lot of people just had them as a shoe-in to win the division. They really took a step back this year. Trevor Lawrence didn't look great. I know he was injured part of the season. He didn't look great. Doug Peterson's coaching kind of took a step back. Wasn't great there. The defense, they were good. They weren't where they were last year. This whole team took a step back, and it cost them dearly. They thought that, with the division being the way it is, you can take a step back and you can still be good, but it ends up costing them in the end. As the Texans just swooped in and took that division from them. And now the Jaguars sit here in the offseason, and you got to find a way to get back to where you were the second half of the 2022 season, because the first half wasn't great. The second half is when they really turned it on, and that's when they went on that playoff run. And they got to refine that magic, have it consist over a 17-week season, plus however many playoff games you want. But you got to find that consistency again, and that should be the biggest target for the Jaguars this offseason. Tennessee Titans, I gave them a D+. I still think the firing of Vrabel, probably not the best of ideas. I know you're bringing in Brian Callahan, which I think is an okay hire, but you got to have a quarterback for him to work with this offense, I think. I don't think Will Levis is that quarterback. Brian Tannehill sure isn't. I know Tannehill, I believe, is a free agent this year, so he may not even be in Tennessee. Malik Willis, remember him? He's not that guy either. The Titans feel like a team that should trade up to get a quarterback this year, but I don't think they will because they've taken quarterbacks the past 2 years. They're going to ride with Levis, even though I don't think he's that good. And we'll see where they go from there. I don't think it's going to end up working out well for them with Will Levis, but hey, I can be wrong because everybody can be wrong at some point. And finally, we get to the final division, the AFC West, home of the Super Bowl champions. That is the Kansas City Chiefs. They earn an A. Now, you might be saying, hey, Nick, they won the Super Bowl. Why isn't that an A+? I actually didn't go lower on this because I was kind of thinking A-, but the Super Bowl bump does help. The Chiefs weren't that good this year. Out of their Super Bowl teams that they've had these past half a decade, this was the worst one, and they still ended up winning the Super Bowl. This team, week 1 versus the Lions, Kelsey was out, Jones was out. They lose. They win 6 straight or something like that. They come back from the bye, I believe, and they kind of just fell flat. I think they went 3-3 in that stretch, something like that. And this team didn't really kick it back into gear until playoff time or right before it. And I mean, credit to them. That is what you need to do to win the Super Bowl. You got to be in gear at the right time, have the momentum, and you're on your way to a Super Bowl championship, basically. And that's what the Chiefs did this year. But we did see weaknesses in this team. Like I mentioned earlier, their run defense was not great. The fact that the Ravens and the 49ers didn't utilize the run game more really did shock me. I mean, the 49ers, they somewhat figured it out. They ran the ball more than the Ravens did, but they still didn't end up winning because they put the ball in Brock Purdy's hands too much. If they would have just kept running the ball, I think the 49ers actually end up winning that game, exposing the weakness of that Chiefs defense. But still, also, Patrick Mahomes' wide receivers, they were the worst that they've been in a while. And he's still here. He's still got a Super Bowl ring. So overall, an A season for the Kansas City Chiefs. The Las Vegas Raiders. This team, first half of the season, awful. I don't think there's any arguing it. They fired Josh McDaniels, bring in interim coach Antonio Pierce. He turns them around. He has this team going for a wild card spot in the last few weeks of the season. Obviously, things don't go their way. They don't make the playoffs, but they finish 8-9, I believe, which thoroughly deserves the interim tag being taken off of Antonio Pierce. I think he's building a good culture there. I know there were comments this week about how he's going to emulate the bad boy Pistons when they play the Chiefs. Sometimes you got to get a little physical to get wins in those games. And you know what? I absolutely love it. You got to bring some type of, mentality to find a way to beat Mahomes. And, this is a league where if you even breathe on the quarterback, it's going to be a penalty. So do I see this potentially backfiring if you're going to play with a, little bit more, grunt on it? It might backfire. But if it doesn't, I mean, I'm not saying that the Raiders are going to win the division, but if they can just start piecing wins together, I don't see why this can't be a team that makes a wild card game, makes it interesting at least. We'll see. The Denver Broncos, B-. They also had a rocky start to the season. They kind of came into their own at the end of the season. Then they sit Russell Wilson. And now Russell Wilson most likely getting cut. The Russell Wilson era in Denver seems to be over. I don't know. Obviously, the Broncos have to find a new quarterback this offseason because Russell Wilson isn't their guy. I think Sean Payton probably has a few guys in mind. I don't know even who I would consider. I don't know if you make some moves in the draft to try to get a quarterback there, if you're going to go try and get a Kirk Cousins. I don't know. But I think it's going to be an interesting offseason ahead for the Broncos because I do believe, minus the quarterback, they have all the pieces to make the playoffs next year. I really do believe that. And finally, the Los Angeles Chargers. Oh my, what a bad season for them. They end up 5-12, 5-13, somewhere around there. Obviously, the firing of Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco after the debacle that was the Vegas game where they lost 63-20 or something like that. An absolute debacle of that game. And the Chargers go big game fishing. Bring in national championship head coach Jim Harbaugh. And it seems like things are getting rejuvenated with the Chargers now. This season was an absolute disaster. Justin Herbert getting injured, absolute disaster. If Jim Harbaugh can get Justin Herbert to live up to the expectations that people have for him, once this is a playoff team, this is potentially a division-winning team, potentially a team that knocks off the Chiefs because I don't think the Raiders are there yet, and I don't think the Broncos are either, depending on who the Broncos get at QB. I think the Chargers are the only team built to take this division from the Chiefs. The question is, can Jim Harbaugh get all of that talent out of this team to get them over that line? And it may take a few years, but I think we see massive improvement next year under Jim Harbaugh, because Jim Harbaugh was a very good NFL coach. He turned that 49ers team, I believe they won 4 games the year that before he came in, and then they made it to the NFC title the first year there. So the Chargers are definitely 100% a team to watch next year for potentially taking away the division from the Kansas City Chiefs. But given that is going to wrap up this AFC grades of the year. Like I said, there were a lot of interesting teams in the AFC. I think it was more interesting than the NFC this year. And again, those were just my opinions. If you feel like I was completely wrong on something, feel free to let me know in those comments. But given that, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Pigskin Perspectives. Don't know what's next. Something is going to come up at some point next week probably, and that will turn into a video. But yeah, for now, thank you so much for watching. If you just stumbled across this video, where have you been all season, as football season's over now? But yeah, click like, click subscribe. We'll be back with more content soon. I'm sure I'll think of something. So thank you so much for watching. We will see you again soon for another episode of Pigskin Perspectives.